Hey everyone, welcome back to BullionIQ, your trusted space for crypto insights, where I break down I'm your guide through the world of cryptocurrency, helping you make sense of market trends, tokenomics, and investment strategies without the confusing jargon. Today I want to talk about something that genuinely blew my mind and could have a huge impact on XRP in the near future. We're looking at a possible XRP supply shock, and yes, it could happen 100 years before Bitcoin ever reaches its maximum supply. Now, I know that sounds a little crazy, but by the end of this video, you'll understand why this is a big deal, and I'll also touch on an exciting side project called Unity Nodes that I think you'll find pretty interesting. Let's start with the obvious. Everyone knows Bitcoin is supposed to be the scarce one, right? It's capped at 21 million coins, and that scarcity is baked into its code. But XRP, which many people overlook in terms of scarcity, could actually face its own supply limit far sooner. I first came across this idea while doom-scrolling crypto Twitter, and a tweet caught my eye referencing a WisdomTree report. For context, WisdomTree is a major asset manager handling over $100 billion. Initially, I thought this had to be hype. XRP has a massive total supply. How could it ever run into a shortage? That's when curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to dig deeper. I jumped into our free educational Discord server, which is linked in the description below, and asked if anyone had seen the report. Some people had, some hadn't, but everyone seemed intrigued. That's when I realized I had to do my own research. I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, settled in, and prepared for a long night of exploring XRP's supply mechanics, its history, and what this all could mean for future prices. By the end of this, you'll see why some analysts are even whispering about triple-digit XRP prices, though I'll be careful to separate facts from speculation. The reason this matters is because XRP's total supply and the way it's managed are very different from Bitcoin. Ripple, the company behind XRP, has been releasing coins from an escrow account since 2017, carefully controlling the flow of new tokens into the market. Each month, 1 billion XRP is released from escrow, but roughly 700 million of that is put back into a new escrow. That leaves only about 300 million XRP entering circulation each month on average. Over time, this controlled release creates a much smaller net supply than most people assume when they see the 100 billion total supply figure. Now imagine that schedule continuing for the next decade. By around 2035, if things stay the same, the escrow would be empty, and all 100 billion XRP would have been released. This means that for the first time, the circulating supply would stop increasing, and XRP could start experiencing gradual deflation due to its small burn mechanism with every transaction. Even though the amount burned per transaction is tiny, over years it adds up. Once the escrow finishes, every transaction slowly decreases the total XRP supply, potentially making it scarcer and more valuable. So if you're following the crypto space and want to understand why XRP might behave differently from Bitcoin, this is the moment to pay attention. XRP's supply dynamics are shifting from a period of inflation, with new tokens released each month, to a potential period of scarcity and deflation. This could attract investors, traders, and institutions who previously dismissed XRP because of its large supply. Combined with other factors like DeFi projects locking XRP and the potential launch of ETFs, the stage could be set for a significant change in market dynamics. If you're excited about this and want to explore crypto in a way that's easy to follow, make sure to hit the like button and subscribe to BullionIQ for more expert insights. In the next part, we'll dig deeper into XRP's escrow mechanics, the exact numbers behind the supply release, and what all this means for its price potential in the coming years. Now that we've set the stage, let's get into the heart of how XRP's supply works and why it could face a supply shock in the coming years. For years, one of the main criticisms of XRP has been its enormous total supply of 100 billion coins. People assumed that such a large number would make it impossible for XRP to rise significantly in price. Compared to Bitcoin's capped 21 million coins, it seemed like XRP would always be too plentiful to matter. But here's the twist. Most of those 100 billion coins are not actually in circulation. Ripple, the company behind XRP, locked the majority of these tokens in an escrow account. Since 2017, Ripple has been releasing 1 billion XRP each month from escrow. That sounds like a lot, but here's the catch. Not all of it is actually added to the market. About 700 million of that 1 billion is placed back into a new escrow account, leaving only roughly 300 million XRP entering circulation each month on average. This steady, controlled release is designed to prevent sudden oversupply and stabilize the market. When you look at it this way, the 100 billion XRP figure is a little misleading. The actual circulating supply grows slowly, and this controlled release schedule will not continue forever. If the current rate stays the same, the escrow will be empty in roughly 9 years, around 2035. That means all 100 billion XRP will have been released and no new supply will be added from escrow. At that point, the only thing reducing the total XRP supply is the tiny fraction of coins destroyed during transactions, also known as the burn mechanism. Every time someone sends XRP, a small amount is permanently removed from the network. On its own, it's tiny. Fractions of a penny per transaction, but over the years it adds up. Once the escrow ends, this burn mechanism becomes the only thing reducing supply, making XRP gradually deflationary. But things could happen faster. Ripple may increase its usage of the escrowed coins, releasing more than the net 300 million XRP per month. Analysts have modeled scenarios where even small increases in usage could empty the escrow sooner, perhaps in 6 to 7 years. In a more extreme hypothetical scenario, if Ripple stopped relocking any coins, the escrow could be exhausted in as little as 3 years. That's not the most likely case, but it illustrates how quickly the supply dynamics can change depending on company decisions and network activity. The key takeaway is that within a decade, XRP's supply growth will slow dramatically and could even reverse slightly due to the burn mechanism. This is an important concept because it flips the traditional narrative about XRP. What was once seen as a coin with far too many tokens is gradually becoming scarce in a way that Bitcoin won't experience for another century. While Bitcoin's supply will continue increasing slowly until 2140, XRP's effective circulating supply could start shrinking within our lifetimes. This has huge implications for investors, traders, and institutions. Scarcity often drives value, and as XRP becomes more scarce, it could attract renewed interest from market participants who previously dismissed it because of its high supply. Moreover, XRP's potential scarcity is amplified by new DeFi projects. Platforms like Flare Network and Axela are creating wrapped XRP tokens that require locking up the original XRP as collateral. Estimates suggest billions of XRP could be temporarily removed from circulation in these projects, further reducing the supply available for daily trading. This effect, combined with the end of escrow releases and gradual token burns, sets up a scenario where demand may outstrip supply, leading to a classic supply shock. So, understanding XRP's escrow and supply mechanics is critical. It's not just about the 100 billion total tokens. It's about how many are actually circulating, how that changes over time, and what factors like burns, institutional accumulation, and DeFi lockups do to the available supply. By the time all the escrow is released, XRP's story could look very different from what many people expect today. Investors who recognize this early may have an edge as the market begins to adjust. Now that we understand how XRP's escrow and supply releases work, let's talk about what happens once the escrow finishes and why that could make XRP a deflationary asset. Every time XRP is used for a transaction, a tiny fraction of coins is destroyed, also known as being burned. It may seem insignificant at first, just a few drops of XRP per transfer. But over time, this adds up. Since XRP launched, over 14 million coins have already been burned through normal network activity. Once all the escrow releases end, these tiny burns will be the only factor slowly reducing the total supply of XRP. In other words, XRP's circulating supply could start to shrink gradually, creating a unique scenario where the coin becomes increasingly scarce over time. This is a massive shift from the past, when the market had been worried about oversupply. Think about it this way. Bitcoin's scarcity is very far in the future. The last Bitcoin won't be mined until 2014, more than a century from now. XRP, on the other hand, could reach its supply limit in just a few years. This makes its scarcity almost immediate in comparison. Unlike Bitcoin, where the supply grows slowly over time, XRP's effective supply could stabilize and even shrink depending on network activity. The potential for deflation is built into XRP's system and is not theoretical. It's a direct result of how the ledger operates. Every transaction, every payment, every transfer contributes a small burn. Multiply that by millions of transactions per year, and over time, the total effect is meaningful. This is where the market dynamics start to get interesting. When a cryptocurrency's supply starts decreasing while demand remains steady or grows, the economics of scarcity kick in. If people need XRP for payments, DeFi projects, or institutional use, but the circulating supply isn't increasing, basic supply and demand principles suggest that the price should trend upward. Even modest demand growth could be enough to push prices higher. This is exactly what analysts mean when they talk about a supply shock, too many buyers chasing too few coins. It's similar to what happens when a popular product, like a new gaming console, sells out quickly. The price in secondary markets goes up, sometimes dramatically, until balance is restored. Adding to this, new DeFi projects are creating additional scarcity. Platforms like Flare Network with FXRP and Axela with MXRP are allowing users to lock up XRP in decentralized finance applications. While using a wrapped token for lending, yield farming, or staking, the original XRP remains locked and unavailable for trading. Estimates suggest that these projects could lock up billions of XRP, temporarily removing a significant portion of the circulating supply. When you combine this with the escrow ending and ongoing transaction burns, the potential for supply constraints becomes very real. Institutional accumulation also adds another layer to this story. Large investors, hedge funds, and asset managers are quietly buying and holding XRP. Some are even considering it for treasury purposes, similar to how some companies hold Bitcoin. This reduces liquid supply further. On top of that, the potential launch of XRP ETFs could bring in an entirely new class of investors who will need to buy and hold XRP to back their ETF shares. The combination of escrow ending, burns, DeFi lockups, institutional buying, and ETFs could all converge to create an environment where the available XRP is much lower than many expect. For anyone looking at XRP, this is an important moment to understand. The supply narrative is shifting from one of abundance to one of potential scarcity. While this doesn't guarantee immediate price surges, it lays the foundation for long-term growth if demand continues to increase or even stays stable. In the next part, we'll explore how this changing supply interacts with demand from payments, DeFi, and institutional investors, and what it could mean for XRP's future price potential. Now that we've covered how XRP's supply could shrink over time, it's important to look at the other side of the equation, demand. Supply alone doesn't drive price. It's how supply interacts with demand that matters. Recently, several factors have emerged that could increase the demand for XRP, and these are exciting developments for anyone following this coin closely. First, we have decentralized finance, or DeFi, projects that are gaining traction. Platforms like Flare Network with FXRP and Accela with MXRP allow users to lock up their XRP as collateral while using a wrapped version of the coin for activities like lending, yield farming, or staking. When XRP is locked in these protocols, it is effectively removed from circulation. Estimates suggest that billions of XRP could be locked up in DeFi projects, which temporarily reduces the liquid supply available for daily trading. This effect is similar to a shortage in the real world. When a large portion of a commodity is taken off the market, the remaining supply becomes more valuable. Beyond DeFi, institutional interest is also growing. Hedge funds, asset managers, and even some companies are quietly buying XRP and holding it for the long term. There are whispers of businesses using XRP as a treasury asset, similar to how companies have been adopting Bitcoin or Ethereum. When large investors accumulate XRP, it reduces the coins available on exchanges, making the market tighter. This accumulation doesn't happen overnight, but over time, it can create a situation where there are more buyers than available coins, pushing prices higher. Institutions often bring credibility and stability to a market, which can attract more investors, further increasing demand. Another factor to consider is the potential launch of XRP ETFs. Exchange-traded funds are investment products that allow investors to gain exposure to an asset without buying it directly. If an ETF for XRP is approved, it would create a new class of investors who would need to purchase XRP to back the ETF shares. This could drive a large influx of demand in a relatively short period, as these funds would need to hold actual coins. When you combine this with the potential reduction in supply from escrow ending, transaction burns, and DeFi lockups, you can see how supply and demand might start to move in opposite directions. This is exactly the recipe for what analysts call a supply shock, a scenario where demand outstrips available supply, pushing prices upward. It's important to note that while all of this sounds bullish, nothing in crypto is guaranteed. Demand may grow slower than expected, or unforeseen events could affect adoption. However, the combination of changing supply dynamics and growing demand from multiple sources is certainly creating a more compelling narrative for XRP. The market is starting to recognize that the old criticisms about XRP's high supply may no longer hold true. Instead, the coin's controlled release, transaction burn mechanism, and new demand streams could make it much scarcer and more valuable over time. This also highlights a unique opportunity for investors and traders to think strategically. Understanding the supply and demand mechanics helps you see beyond short-term price movements. It's not about chasing a pump or following hype, it's about understanding the structural changes happening in the XRP ecosystem. DeFi lockups, institutional accumulation, and potential ETFs are all part of this larger picture. By recognizing these trends, you can better anticipate how the market might react as the supply dynamics shift over the next few years. In essence, XRP is moving into a new phase. From a period of steady inflation with a high circulating supply, it is transitioning into a period where supply growth slows, burns reduce the circulating coins, and demand may increase from multiple sources. This combination could set the stage for significant long-term price growth. In the next part, We'll dive into the potential price scenarios, how analysts are projecting future values, and what realistic expectations should look like given these supply and demand changes. Now that we've explored both supply and demand for XRP, it's time to talk about what this could mean for the price. Naturally, when people hear words like supply shock or scarcity, the first question that comes to mind is, how high could XRP go? Let's take a realistic look. The total supply mechanics, transaction burns, DeFi lockups, institutional accumulation, and potential ETFs all combine to reduce the available circulating supply. When demand either stays the same or grows, the price will have to adjust to match the reduced supply. Think of it like a popular product in limited stock. If more people want it than what is available, the price rises until supply and demand balance out. For XRP, this balance could tilt significantly as the next few years progress. Some analysts and crypto enthusiasts have started throwing out bold predictions. There's talk on forums and Twitter about triple-digit XRP prices, meaning $100 or more per coin, if the supply shock scenario plays out and adoption continues to grow. Of course, this is on the high end of speculation. To be clear, XRP is currently trading around $2.65 to $3. A jump to $100 would represent a massive increase far beyond what most traditional investors might expect. But the theory behind this isn't entirely unrealistic. Supply scarcity combined with growing demand, especially from institutions and DeFi platforms, creates a scenario where upward price movement is very plausible over time. It won't happen overnight, but it sets the stage for significant long-term potential. It's also important to separate realistic expectations from hype. While some enthusiasts talk about $500 XRP or more in the distant future, these numbers assume almost perfect conditions. Continued adoption, high transaction activity, new DeFi integrations, ETF approvals, and steady accumulation by institutions. Any disruption in these factors could slow growth or cause volatility. Crypto markets are famously unpredictable, so caution is always necessary. That's why I always stress that while XRP's supply dynamics are promising, no one should consider these speculative price points as guarantees. They are possibilities, not certainties. Even with cautious optimism, the structural changes in XRP's supply create a very different narrative from the past. For years, investors worried that 100 billion coins would keep prices flat. Now, thanks to escrow mechanics, deflationary transaction burns, DeFi lockups, and institutional interest, those fears are less relevant. The coin is effectively becoming scarcer, and scarcity tends to support higher prices if demand grows or even remains stable. From an investment perspective, this is an important insight because it flips the old narrative on its head. XRP is no longer just a fast transactional coin. It's becoming a coin with real potential for value growth. Looking ahead, the coming years will be critical. As the escrow releases taper off and DeFi platforms potentially lock away billions of coins, we could see the first real signs of this supply shock. Institutions and ETFs may accelerate the effect by buying and holding large amounts of XRP. This combination of reduced available supply and growing demand creates the perfect storm for price appreciation. While no one can predict exact numbers, understanding these dynamics helps you see why analysts are excited about XRP's long-term prospects. In the end, XRP's journey is a story of transformation, from being criticized for an oversized supply to potentially becoming deflationary and scarce. The coin is evolving in ways that could support significant long-term growth. While speculative predictions are fun to consider, the key takeaway is that supply dynamics are shifting, and savvy investors should pay attention. In the final part, Part 6, we'll wrap everything together, summarize the biggest takeaways, and look at what investors should focus on as XRP moves toward this potential supply shock. Deflationary dynamics, demand factors, and potential price scenarios. It's time to wrap everything up and look at what this all means for investors and the crypto community. The key takeaway from this deep dive is that XRP is entering a new phase in its life cycle. The narrative is shifting from concerns about oversupply to a scenario where scarcity could become a real driver of value. Once the escrow releases finish, the circulating supply will no longer grow at the same pace, and the burn mechanism will slowly reduce the number of coins in circulation. When you combine that with billions potentially locked in DeFi and accumulating institutional holdings, the stage is set for a supply-demand imbalance, or what analysts call a supply shock. This shift is important because it fundamentally changes how we think about XRP as an investment. For years, many investors avoided XRP simply because they believed there were too many coins for it to gain value. But that argument is becoming outdated. In fact, the scarcity narrative could attract a new wave of investors who were previously skeptical. When supply tightens and demand increases, basic economics suggests the price should respond upward. That doesn't guarantee a sudden spike, but it sets the foundation for long-term growth potential. Investors who understand these dynamics are better positioned to make informed decisions rather than just chasing short-term hype. At the same time, it's important to remain cautious. Cryptocurrencies are highly volatile, and nothing is guaranteed. Supply shocks don't automatically mean instant price explosions. Demand has to materialize, and market conditions can change quickly. Institutional interest, DeFi adoption, and ETF launches are all potential catalysts, but they come with uncertainty. It's crucial for anyone considering investing in XRP to balance optimism with realism. Diversification, secure exchanges, and careful risk management remain essential. Just because the supply is becoming scarce doesn't mean investors should go all in without a strategy. Another takeaway is the comparison between XRP and Bitcoin. Bitcoin is famously scarce, with a fixed supply of 21 million coins, but the final Bitcoin won't be mined until 2140. That's more than a century from now. XRP, on the other hand, could reach its effective supply limit in less than a decade. This means XRP's scarcity is almost immediate compared to Bitcoin, making it an interesting complement for investors. Bitcoin remains the ultimate long-term store of value, while XRP could offer faster, near-term scarcity-driven opportunities. Understanding this distinction helps investors position themselves strategically across both assets. Finally, the XRP ecosystem is also evolving in exciting ways beyond supply and demand. New projects like Unity nodes show how creative and innovative the crypto space has become. Even though Unity nodes is separate from XRP, it highlights how blockchain technology is creating new opportunities for participation, rewards, and real-world use. As the market continues to mature, the interplay between traditional cryptocurrencies, DeFi, and innovative blockchain projects could further shape the investment landscape. In conclusion, XRP is at a potentially pivotal moment. The end of escrow, releases, transaction burns, DeFi lockups, institutional accumulation, and potential ETFs are all factors that could drive a supply shock. While speculative predictions about triple-digit XRP prices should be taken with caution, the structural changes in supply and emerging demand make a strong case for long-term growth. Knowledge and awareness are the best tools for navigating this market. By understanding the mechanics behind XRP, investors can make more informed decisions rather than reacting to short-term hype. If you followed this journey, hopefully, you now have a clearer picture of why XRP's story is changing and why supply scarcity could become a major factor. Remember, crypto is volatile, research is key, and balance is everything. Keep learning, stay cautious, and pay attention to how these dynamics unfold over the coming years.